All right, hey nerds. So, going to continue my series on the book by Noam Chomsky, who is, of course, the famous linguist and who has written about politics for decades, and he's a political activist and, famous lefty. And I'm talking about his book, Chomsky on Anarchism, which is actually a compilation of his various essays and other works and excerpts from some of his books on his opinions about anarchism, which is interesting because a lot of his books are criticizing the American foreign policy, basically. So this part is from Language and Freedom, and he's talking about a quote from Rousseau, who a lot of people know as the famous. He's not act. I thought he was French, but I double checked this, and he's the famous Genevan philosopher who was born in Geneva, and he was obviously a very seminal figure in the French Revolution, and people used his writing to justify their arguments. And so he was an 18th century philosopher who, like I said, had a major effect on the French Revolution, in which ended the monarchy, and the monarchs and the king were beheaded and all that shit. And he's known as like the epitome of like the classic politically philosophical politically philosophical lefty, in kind of opposition to Hobbes, who I've talked about in my series that I've been doing on Leo Strauss's book on Spinoza's critique of religion. And Leo Strauss is that famous political philosopher, and he was actually around at the time of Hobbes, but Hobbes has his famous book Leviathan, basically justifying monarchy to oversimplify. So Hobbes is seen as like the polar opposite of Rousseau, basically. But anyway, for the context of this quote, he's talking about basically the 7 Years' War and the ancient history of war fomenting in Europe leading up to the French Revolution. And this quote, I believe, is from Rousseau's essay criticizing monarchy in kings, which people use to justify the French Revolution. And he's talking about the horrors of war. And one of the reasons that the French monarchy needed to be overthrown was that the basically the horrors of war. But I think he brilliantly, like viscerally describes war and the evil of it. Although, it gets a lot more gory than that in many examples, like Dan Carlin's podcast, for example, the awesome internet historian who makes epic long podcasts that are basically like audiobooks. But anyway, any other further preamble aside, let's get into Rousseau's quote here. Hence arose the national wars, battles, murders, and reprisals, which make nature tremble and shock reason, and all those horrible prejudices which rank the honor of shedding human blood among the virtues. The most decent men learn to consider it one of their duties to murder their fellow men. At length, men were seen to massacre each other by the thousands without knowing why. More murders were committed on a single day of fighting, and more horrors in the capture of a single city than were committed in the state of nature during whole centuries over the entire face of the earth. I just think that's so well said by Rousseau. And yeah, I think I don't really need to say anything else other than that. Like I said, Chomsky quotes Rousseau exposing the horrors of war.